Why I regret moving into a nursing home. 6 hard truths you must know. Elderly wisdom. At the age of 82, I've accumulated a wealth of life experience, and with it, a deep understanding of the decisions that shape our later years. However, there's one choice that stands out as a significant regret: moving into a nursing home. At the time, it genuinely felt like the most sensible path forward. My family, with the best of intentions, encouraged this decision, promising me an environment filled with ample care and unwavering comfort. I readily believed their assurances, envisioning a life of ease and support. Yet, upon entering the facility, I discovered that the reality was a stark contrast to the idyllic picture I had been painted. I understand that many of you might be contemplating this very option, perhaps for yourselves or for a beloved family member. It's easy to perceive a nursing home as the safest choice, a way to ensure well-being and alleviate burdens. Or perhaps you've been told it will simplify life, making daily challenges disappear. But before you take that monumental step, I implore you to hear my story. I wish someone had shared these 6 crucial truths with me before I made the transition. Because the truth is, life within a nursing home is far more than just a matter of convenience. It profoundly alters the very fabric of your existence. And once you enter, extricating yourself from that environment is a significantly more complex undertaking than you might anticipate. Please stay with me until the very end, as some of these revelations may come as a genuine surprise. For anyone currently considering a nursing home, this video could be the exact guidance they need to hear before embarking on a decision that will irrevocably change their life. Now, let us begin this important exploration. My first profound regret stems from the loss of my independence. The most jarring realization after moving into the nursing home wasn't the confinement of a small room, the rigidly scheduled meal times, or even the constant presence of unfamiliar faces. It was the dawning, stark understanding that I had relinquished control over my own life. Prior to this transition, my days were structured by my own rhythm. I dictated when I woke, when I ate, and how I chose to spend my waking hours. Spontaneous walks were a simple pleasure. I could prepare my own meals if I desired, or simply retreat to the quiet comfort of my favorite armchair with a captivating book. However, within the sterile confines of the nursing home, I swiftly came to grasp that my time was no longer my own. Every aspect of my day was dictated by a schedule that bore no resemblance to my own personal preferences. Breakfast was served at a fixed hour, irrespective of my actual hunger. Lights were extinguished at a predetermined time, whether I was feeling sleepy or wide awake and eager to engage in evening activities. Even a simple desire for a walk outside might necessitate seeking permission and waiting for an available staff member to provide assistance. The most basic decisions, such as selecting what to eat or even what to wear, began to feel like granted privileges rather than fundamental human choices. I vividly recall my first week there. Waking in a bed that felt entirely alien, I sat up, stretched, and reached for the book I had been engrossed in back home. As my gaze swept across the unfamiliar surroundings, the truth hit me with full force. This was not my home. My cherished books, my comfortable favorite chair, the myriad small comforts I had carefully curated over years of living, they were all gone. In their place stood stark, impersonal walls, a bed I hadn't chosen, and an unsettling, pervasive feeling I couldn't shake. I was no longer the captain of my own ship. The most agonizing aspect of this realization was understanding that once you surrender your independence, reclaiming it becomes an almost insurmountable challenge. You adapt because you have no other option. You cease to question the predetermined meal options. You stop asking for permission to take a walk whenever the whim strikes. You learn to conform to their system, but in doing so, a part of yourself begins to fade away. If you are contemplating a nursing home, ask yourself this critical question: are you truly prepared to relinquish the small, everyday freedoms that define your personal existence? Because once those freedoms are gone, you will miss them with an intensity you could never have predicted. My second major regret is the profound feeling of being forgotten. One of the most difficult truths to confront after moving into a nursing home is the unsettling realization that the world outside continues to spin, largely without your participation. In the initial stages of my arrival, my family offered earnest assurances that they would visit frequently. I took them at their word, and in the beginning, their visits were consistent. My daughter would come by weekly, and my grandchildren would grace me with their presence on weekends. For a short while, it felt as though I still retained a tangible connection to my former life. However, as the months gradually unspooled, the frequency of these visits began to wane. My daughter transitioned from in-person visits to phone calls, and my grandchildren, understandably, became increasingly occupied with the demands of school and work. The holidays in particular were the most challenging periods. Promises of gatherings and shared time would be made, but inevitably, plans would shift at the last minute. Suddenly, I would find myself alone in a common room, observing other residents with their hopeful gazes fixed on the entrance, silently wishing today would be the day someone remembered them. It wasn't that my family's love diminished. Life, in its relentless march, simply intervened. When you are no longer a daily presence, it becomes remarkably easy for others to assume your well-being, to believe you are adjusting seamlessly, and to conclude that you require less attention. But the harsh reality is this: the longer your tenure in a nursing home, the simpler it becomes for people to overlook the depth of your ongoing need for their presence. I recall one particular evening sitting in my room, phone in hand, wrestling with the internal debate of whether to call my son. The fear of being a burden, of reminding him of my solitary existence, of anticipating a visit that might never materialize, weighed heavily on me. So I placed the phone back down. It was in that moment of quiet resignation that the full weight of my new reality descended. This was now my life, watching the days drift by, hoping with a quiet desperation that someone would remember to include me. If you are contemplating a move into a nursing home, ask yourself, are you truly prepared for the pervasive loneliness that can accompany such a transition? Because regardless of the depth of your family's love, when you are out of sight, it is far easier than you might imagine to also become out of mind. If you are still engaged with this video and finding these insights valuable, please take a moment to comment with the number 2 below. This simple act lets me know you are here and receiving the message. And if you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, I highly recommend doing so and activating the notification bell. This ensures you won't miss any future videos that could offer similar guidance. Now, let us move forward. My third regret is the loss of my sense of purpose. When I initially transitioned into the nursing home, I believed I was merely changing my physical location. I failed to recognize that in doing so, I was also fundamentally altering the very reasons that gave my life meaning. Back in my own home, I had responsibilities, routines, and hobbies that provided me with a compelling reason to rise each morning. Even the smallest of tasks, tending to my plants, preparing my own coffee, tidying my personal space, imbued me with a sense of accomplishment and purpose. Within the nursing home, however, those daily rituals dissolved. Meals were prepared for me, household chores were handled by others, and my plants, no longer under my care, languished. Initially, I convinced myself that this would be a welcome respite, a chance to finally relax without the burden of chores or responsibilities. But after a few weeks, a disquieting emptiness began to set in. My days felt interminable, stretched out and devoid of meaningful activity, leaving me with little to do but wait. I observed this same ennui in many of the other residents. Individuals who had once exuded vibrant energy now spent their hours sitting, gazing blankly as time seemed to passively slip away. I recall a gentleman named George, an 84-year-old man who had dedicated his entire life to carpentry. In his own home, he was constantly engaged in fixing things, creating small projects in his garage. But here, surrounded by the absence of tools and the lack of any creative outlet, his hands, once so skilled and strong, now lay idle in his lap. "I feel useless," he confessed to me one day, and I understood his sentiment with perfect clarity. When you no longer have something to nurture, something to strive for, life itself begins to lose its intrinsic meaning. The mind, deprived of stimulation, begins to slow, and the body inevitably follows. Soon, you start to feel like just another anonymous resident in a place where time marches on, but very little truly progresses. If you are contemplating a nursing home, you must ask yourself, what is it that truly gives your life purpose? Because upon entering such an environment, finding purpose is not simply a matter of filling your time. It becomes a courageous fight to hold on to the very things that make you feel alive. My fourth regret is the accelerated decline of my health. Before my move to the nursing home, I was, by all accounts, doing quite well for my age. I wasn't participating in athletic competitions, but I was fully capable of managing my daily needs, enjoying walks, and preparing my own meals. I had established routines that kept me physically active: grocery shopping, morning stretches, even simply pacing around my house to maintain leg strength. However, everything changed once I entered the facility. At first, it seemed as though I was simply embracing a more relaxed lifestyle. Meals were conveniently delivered, eliminating the need to stand and cook in the kitchen. If I required assistance with anything, a simple push of a button would summon help. What I failed to recognize was the insidious consequence of this ease. The less I did for myself, the weaker I became. My physical activity diminished, and before long, my legs felt stiffer. I found myself sitting for extended periods, and the simple act of rising from a chair gradually transformed into a noticeable effort. The muscles I had diligently maintained for years began to atrophy at an alarming rate. And I wasn't alone in this observation. I witnessed this same decline in many other residents. Individuals who had arrived walking independently soon found themselves reliant on wheelchairs. Those who had once been fiercely independent now required assistance with tasks they had never previously struggled with. The more help we received, paradoxically, the more we seemed to need it. I vividly remember my neighbor, Alice, an 81-year-old woman who was remarkably spry when she first arrived. She insisted on taking daily walks around the grounds, proclaiming that age was just a number and she wouldn't be slowing down. Yet, after a few months, I noticed her walks becoming less frequent. Soon, she began using a walker and then a wheelchair. One day, she looked at me with a profound sadness and said, "I don't know when it happened, but I feel like I've aged 10 years in just a few months." And that sentiment perfectly encapsulated the experience. When you cease to actively use your body, it begins to deteriorate. In a nursing home, where everything is designed for maximum ease, it becomes dangerously simple to forget that movement is not merely about convenience. It is a fundamental element of survival. Had I understood how rapidly I would lose my physical strength, I would have fought much harder to remain active, to push myself even when I lacked the motivation. If you are considering a nursing home, ask yourself, will you possess the internal drive to maintain your physical strength when every aspect of your environment is engineered to make life effortless? Because once you slow down, regaining that momentum is far more challenging than you might imagine. If you are still with us and finding this information valuable, please comment with the number 4 below to indicate your engagement. And if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so and enabling notifications. Your support is invaluable in enabling us to continue producing content that informs and inspires. Now, let us continue. My 5th regret centers on the toxic loss of privacy and dignity. One of the critical aspects I hadn't fully contemplated before moving into the nursing home was the profound degree to which my privacy would be compromised. In my own home, I had my own personal space, the ability to close my bedroom door, to sit in undisturbed silence if I wished, and to conduct my affairs on my own terms. However, within the nursing home, privacy becomes a scarce and often unattainable luxury. From the very moment of my arrival, I felt a constant sense of being observed. Staff members were perpetually entering and exiting, scheduled room checks were a regular occurrence, and shared living spaces spaces meant you were rarely truly alone. Even the most personal of activities, such as dressing or using the restroom, frequently required assistance. I understand that the staff were merely fulfilling their duties, but it is incredibly challenging to accept help for tasks you have performed independently throughout your entire life. I remember my first week grappling with the disconcerting reality that I had to request permission to perform actions I once did without a second thought. If I desired a shower, I might have to wait until a staff member was available to assist. If I needed to use the restroom, pressing the call button could result in a prolonged wait. Even the selection of meals was restricted. If the day's menu didn't appeal to you, there were few, if any, alternative options. Then there was the unavoidable issue of roommates. Not everyone is afforded the luxury of a private room, and sharing a living space with a stranger, someone you haven't chosen, can be a source of considerable frustration. I was fortunate to be paired with a kind roommate, but I heard numerous accounts from others who were not so lucky. Some shared their space with individuals who were excessively noisy, maintained poor hygiene, or suffered from cognitive impairments that made sleep virtually impossible. And no matter how much you might try to imbue your room with the feeling of home, it never truly feels entirely your own. Dignity is a fragile thing to lose, and I hadn't fully grasped the extent to which mine would be eroded until I was already immersed in that environment. When people enter your room without knocking or without waiting for a response after knocking, when you find yourself being addressed as a patient rather than as an individual person, when your daily routines are dictated by a schedule that was not of your own making, it changes you. You begin to feel less like yourself and more like just another number on a list. If you are contemplating a nursing home, you must ask yourself, are you prepared to relinquish the privacy and autonomy that you have enjoyed throughout your entire life? Because once that autonomy is surrendered, reclaiming it is an arduous undertaking. My sixth and final regret is realizing it is far harder to leave than you think. When I first moved into the nursing home, I rationalized it as a temporary arrangement. I told myself I would give it a try, assess the situation, and if I found it unsatisfactory, I could always return home. What I didn't anticipate was the sheer difficulty of extricating myself once I was settled in. Initially, the idea of leaving seemed straightforward. If I disliked it, I would simply go back to my house. But my house, having stood empty, was no longer the same. Managing it from a distance proved to be an increasingly complex challenge. My children, in my absence, had already begun making practical adjustments, selling items they believed I would no longer need, and even considering renting out the property. When I tentatively broached the subject of returning home, they expressed hesitation. "Are you sure you can manage on your own?" they would ask. "Wouldn't it be safer for you to stay here? We just want what's best for you." Compounding these logistical hurdles was the undeniable issue of my physical decline. After months of living in an environment where I was relieved of the burdens of cooking, cleaning, and even significant physical exertion, my strength had waned considerably. The independence I once possessed had begun to slip away, making the prospect of moving back home more daunting than I had ever imagined. My confidence in my ability to live alone had diminished, and that underlying fear became a significant impediment, keeping me tethered to the facility. I encountered many other residents who shared a similar experience. They too had envisioned their stay as a short-term solution, only to discover that leaving was far more complicated than they had anticipated. The longer one remains in a nursing home, the more challenging it becomes to readjust to life outside its confines. For some, the option to leave vanished entirely once their homes were sold or their savings were depleted by the escalating costs of care, rendering a return to their former lives an impossibility. That truly is the unspoken truth. The act of moving in feels like a reversible decision, but for the vast majority, it is not. The nursing home gradually becomes your entire world, and before you are fully aware of it, the external life you once knew begins to feel like a distant, fading memory. If you are considering a nursing home, ask yourself, are you prepared for the distinct possibility that once you enter, leaving might not be as simple as you currently believe? Because once you settle into that environment, the barriers to departure, whether financial, physical, or emotional, can prove far more formidable than you might anticipate. If you are still watching and finding value in these insights, please comment with the number 6 below. And if you haven't yet subscribed, I urge you to do so and enable notifications. Your continued support is what allows us to create content that informs and inspires. In concluding my reflections, I want to emphasize that I do not regret the natural process of aging itself. My regret is tied solely to the misguided belief that a nursing home represented my only viable option. I entered with expectations of comfort, safety, and an enhanced quality of life. What I encountered, however, was an environment that systematically eroded my independence, my privacy, my sense of purpose, and ultimately, my very sense of self. This doesn't imply that all nursing homes are inherently detrimental. Some individuals genuinely require the level of care and specialized attention they provide. However, before making such a significant commitment, it is imperative to carefully consider what you stand to lose. Once you make the transition, your life will fundamentally and irreversibly change. Had I the opportunity to revisit that decision, I would have been a far more tenacious advocate for remaining in my own home, actively seeking out alternative solutions for support that wouldn't necessitate surrendering my autonomy. I would have ensured that my need for such a drastic move was absolute and undeniable. And for anyone currently navigating this difficult decision-making process, I implore you to take the time to ask yourselves this critical question. Is this truly the best course of action for my personal well-being, or is it merely the path that appears easiest in the immediate present? Because the life you possess today, your established routines, your cherished independence, your invaluable choices, is a treasure worth safeguarding and defending for as long as humanly possible. Thank you for joining me today. I would be deeply grateful to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment below and share one key takeaway you gained from this discussion and how you intend to apply it in your life. Your perspectives are incredibly important to us, so please do not hesitate to share them. Reading your comments provides us with immense motivation and encouragement. If you found this video helpful and insightful, please do consider liking it, subscribing to our channel, and sharing it with others who might benefit. Your support is instrumental in our ability to continue producing valuable content that informs and inspires. Thank you for watching, and we eagerly anticipate your presence in our next video.